In this episode, a man is sandwiched between the jaws of an enormous shark and his surfboard. The skin on his back is peeled like a banana as the shark thrashes him around from side to side. He is just moments from death and praying for a miracle. Miraculously, his prayers are answered in the most unlikely of ways. A pod of dolphins comes to his rescue. Is this divine intervention or animal altruism? You decide. Click like and subscribe. This is Fierce. Todd Michael Endris was a surfer with a larger-than-life character. He was somebody that people instantly fell in love with when they first met him. He lit up every room he walked into. He was the life and soul of the party, but he was known for something else too, something that happened to him when he was 24 years old. On August 28, 2007, he headed out into the surf from Marina State Park Beach, Monterey Bay, California. He joined the other surfers in the water. The waves were breaking at a depth of just 6 feet. The Californian beach is protected. Its huge rugged sand dunes give way to the pristine sands and breakers beyond. It's popular with hang gliders who launch themselves from the top of the dunes and are carried out above the ocean. It's also a popular location for surfers. The surf is reliable and offers some large swells when the conditions are right. Todd loved the ocean. He had his own business servicing aquariums. He was fascinated by marine wildlife. He didn't just love surfing, he loved the environment in which he surfed. He was grateful that he was able to spend his free time in the water amongst friends. On this particular day, after 45 minutes in the water, Todd sat on his board, looking out towards the open sea. He was waiting to catch his next wave, waiting for the next ride. Little did he know it could be his last. From out of nowhere, a 15-foot great white launched up and out of the water. Todd caught a glimpse of it just before it knocked him off his board. He was sent crashing into the ocean, the water engulfing him. It was as though he had been hit by a bus. The force was immense as he was catapulted off his board. He tried to pull himself back onto his board, but the shark was too fast. In a second, it had swum back around and come at the surfer once more. As Todd kicked helplessly at the surface, the shark opened its jaws and clamped them down and around his torso. Todd was sandwiched in the shark's mouth between its serrated teeth and his own surfboard. Whilst the upper jaw of the shark tore the skin from Todd's back, described by the man himself as peeling him like a banana, the surfboard protected his underside. Luckily, the shark wasn't able to rip into his stomach and intestines as the surfboard was in the way. In a moment of terror, Todd turned to see the shark's powerful jaws latched around him. He could feel the sharp teeth tearing into his flesh as it held him in a vice-like grip. In another moment, he was dragged beneath the surface. The shark thrashed its head from side to side, shaking Todd violently. He felt the full force of the predator. It let go briefly, but came back a third time. This time it clamped its mouth around Todd's right leg. Holding it firmly in its jaws gave Todd more stability in which to kick it madly with his left leg. As the water bubbled and boiled around Todd, he didn't believe he was going to die. He held on to a strong belief that he would make it, but he didn't know how. He prayed for divine intervention, and his prayers were answered in the most striking of ways. As the shark released its grip on Todd once more, it circled to come back around. But this time, when it came in for the kill, it was blocked by another marine animal. As Todd lay floating at the surface, blood pouring from an enormous gaping wound on his back, a pod of dolphins circled him. In an unexplained moment of true altruism, the dolphins formed a wall around the injured surfer. His prayers had been answered. Some jumped and splashed out of the water. He could see the dolphins surrounding him, their fins breaking through the surface of the water, protecting him, keeping him from harm. His friends rushed to his aid whilst the dolphins fended off the shark. They pulled Todd towards the shore. He was bleeding profusely. The life was pouring from his limp body. There was no time to waste. He wasn't going to make it. They weren't going to get him to shore in time. Then, a divine power seemed to intervene once more. A huge wave surged behind the surfers and the board on which Todd lay. It pushed them forwards, propelling them toward the shore. In no time, they made it to the shallows and pulled Todd onto dry land. As he slipped in and out of consciousness, the sand around him turned red. He was losing too much blood. The lifeguards at the scene warned Todd's friend, Brian Simpson, that Todd wasn't going to make it. There was just no way anyone could survive such horrendous injuries. When Brian looked down at Todd's injuries, he had to agree with the lifeguards, but he wasn't going to give up on his friend. He worked as an X-ray technician in a trauma unit and was used to seeing gruesome injuries, but this was about as bad as it got. Todd was ashen white by the time he made it to shore. Brian told Todd to slow down his breathing. He needed to remain calm. It was his best chance of slowing his blood loss. The emergency services were called and a medevac helicopter arrived. Todd was airlifted to Santa Clara Medical Center. By the time he arrived, he had lost half of his blood. His blood pressure was dangerously low. It was touch and go whether he would survive the ordeal. Before stitching Todd back up, surgeons apparently had to first figure out what went where, putting the pieces of the jigsaw back together. Todd said that his lungs were visible through the enormous gouge in his back and side. Surgeons closed his wounds with 500 stitches and 200 staples. It took him 6 weeks to regain the blood he had lost. Miraculously, Todd survived the shark attack. He became a local hero and was known locally as Shark Boy. He always had time for people, and whenever people asked him to show him his impressive scar, he would whip off his shirt, revealing a huge bite mark across his back and torso. He wore the scar proudly. He had been lucky to survive such a traumatic ordeal. Despite his narrow escape, Todd returned to the water. He lived to surf another day. But sadly, Todd's life was to hang in the balance once more. Less than 10 years later, 33-year-old Todd crashed his van. He lost control and careened off the road. His black and white pit bull managed to escape from the wreckage. The dog made its way to the main road, barking frantically at passing vehicles, but it would be 10 hours before a biker finally noticed the dog and stopped to investigate. Todd was rushed to the hospital once more. Tragically, after fighting for his life for 11 days in the hospital, he finally succumbed to his injuries and died in September 2016. The memorial that followed his death was attended by more than 100 people. Mourners lined the beach at Monterey Bay. The surfing community joined hands in unison 100 yards from shore, balancing on their surfboards, united as one, remembering one of their own. A minute's applause rang out across the water, a celebration of a life well lived, a final goodbye to their fallen friend, Shark Boy. It was August 15, 2022, a beautiful sunny day, perfect for the beach. 55-year-old Karen Seitz and her family had traveled from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania to Myrtle Beach, South Carolina to spend an unforgettable vacation. They were all more than excited, especially Karen's grandchildren. The family had been planning this trip for over a year. Now, Karen and her husband were finally able to provide their grandchildren the perfect context to make some awesome memories. The kids were over the moon. Karen was too. She had always loved the beach ever since she was a child. There was nothing better than the gentle touch of the sun on her skin, and nothing better than the sound of the waves. August 15th was only the family's second day in Myrtle Beach, but they were already certain everything would be perfect during their stay. How could it not be when they were in one of the most iconic resort cities in the country? Located on the east coast of the United States in Horry County, South Carolina, Myrtle Beach is one of the major tourist centers in the states. Over 20 million tourists choose Myrtle Beach as their vacation destination each year. Maybe it's because of its subtropical climate, or maybe it's because of its miles and miles and miles of beaches. But the city is magnetic. The Grand Strand, an arc of beachland whose primary city is Myrtle Beach, has hundreds of hotels, thousands of restaurants, and tens of golf courses. Myrtle Beach is home to numerous events. It's a city that generally guarantees a good time, equal time relaxation, and more hectic activities. However, not everyone is lucky enough to engage with Myrtle Beach the way they were supposed to. That's what 55-year-old Karen Seitz found out on Monday, August 15, 2022. The day started out beautiful. The sun was up, the sky was blue. The waves of the Atlantic were singing. You know, the proverbial idyllic day at the beach. Karen Seitz and her husband were lying on the beach, carefully supervising their grandchildren. The kids were playing in the sand, happy and at peace. Around afternoon, Karen had an idea. She told her grandchildren they should get in the water, either for a swim or a fun splash. But once they got into the water, the kids' reaction surprised the 55-year-old grandmother. "What if there are sharks? What if there are sharks?" they kept asking. It was strange. Usually, Karen's grandchildren loved the water and never complained about a quick swim. Karen decided that despite the strangeness of the reaction, her grandchildren's worry was just a normal, childish fear. It was her duty as a grandmother to reassure them. "Oh, don't be afraid. It's so rare that anybody ever gets bit by a shark," Karen told the kids. The woman then waited just a few feet away from Brian, her 8-year-old grandson. She was in waist-high water. The water felt nice until it suddenly didn't anymore, and Karen was left fearing for her life. It seemed like her grandchildren's words were more than a childish fear. In retrospect, their words were prophetic. In an instant, a creature jumped out of the water and latched its teeth on Karen's right arm. It was a shark, and a hungry one at that. At first, Karen felt a sharp pain, a pain unlike any other she'd ever felt before. In the first few seconds, the woman had no idea what kind of creature had attacked her. In fact, she thought it was anything but a shark. If she had to guess, she would have said it was a jellyfish currently attached to her arm. But when Karen Seitz looked down, she came face to face with the truth. Her attacker was indeed a shark. As soon as the woman realized what was happening, she acted. It had more to do with her strong survival instinct than with her giving much thought about the right way to proceed. The woman used her left arm to push the creature away, and shockingly, it worked. It was like the shark only wanted to get a small taste, though the bite was anything but small. Brian Seitz, Karen's 8-year-old grandson, watched in shock, only a couple of feet away. He had seen everything. The shark jumping out of the water, latching itself on Brian's grandma's arm, waving its tail, and then finally letting go and falling down into the water. And as if that sight hadn't been scary enough, he was now faced with the sight of a bloody, terrified Karen. The woman and her grandchildren hurried toward the shore. Once they made it to the beach, they were surrounded by people. The racket was deafening. People were yelling, trying to warn others about the danger lurking beneath the waves. Others were still in the water, making their way toward the shore in an erratic manner. It was madness. Karen was still in shock once she got on the beach. She kept saying she didn't want to see her arm. She could feel the sharp pain and the blood trickling down her arm. Luckily, help was seconds away. An ER worker who happened to be at the beach heard the noise and rushed to help Karen, washing the woman's injured arm with bottled water. Minutes later, Karen Seitz was taken to the hospital where she underwent surgery. Hundreds of stitches later, Karen was ready to start her way toward recovery. She had suffered damage to her ring finger as well, but the surgery was a success. She was released from the hospital only a day after the attack. Despite this, doctors couldn't guarantee Karen's arm would ever be the same. The shark had actually somewhat damaged the woman's nerves and tendons as well. All things considered, though, the injuries could have been so much worse. Not to mention, Karen's grandchildren could have been hurt too. And they were, in a sense. 8-year-old Brian Seitz, who had witnessed the whole thing, was left traumatized by the attack and the possibility of losing his grandmother in front of his very eyes. But the Seitz didn't let the attack destroy their vacation. They decided to stay in Myrtle Beach for the week and try to enjoy the city's other attractions. They even visited the beach again, though Brian decided to stick to sunbathing and playing on the sand. "I'll sit on the sand, but I ain't going in the water," the little boy told reporters. There was another shark attack on Monday, August 15th, only about half a mile away from where Karen was bitten. This time, the victim was luckier. The second attack was a more glancing bite to the leg, with no real repercussions. 4 shark attacks were reported in South Carolina a year before, in 2021. Experts advise against swimming in the ocean at dawn or dusk when sharks approach the coast to feed, to leave the water when schools of fish are seen close to the surf, and to avoid areas where people may be using bait to fish. Daniel Abel, a professor of marine science at Coastal Carolina University, said this after Karen Sight's ordeal. "It's very important that we treat our sharks, our ocean, and our entire planet with more respect than we do now."